Ethan Cole lived alone on the edge of a dusty mining colony, far from the bright lights of any major city. His repair station was small, built from old metal sheets and salvaged parts. Inside, the smell of oil and hot metal filled the air. Machines surrounded him, some broken, some half-fixed. He worked late most nights, fixing whatever he could to keep food on the table. Since his wife passed away 2 years ago, Ethan had been both father and mother to his baby son, Noah. Life had become a quiet routine of work, feeding the baby, and trying to sleep between the cries. That night, the wind outside howled like a ghost. The power flickered, and the heater coughed out a weak breath of warmth. Noah was crying again, his tiny fists waving in the air as Ethan gently rocked him in one arm. It was midnight, and the silence outside was thick. Ethan had just managed to calm Noah when a sudden knock echoed through the metal door. He froze. The sound was sharp and heavy, 3 knocks, slow and deliberate. No one ever visited this late. No one ever visited at all. The colony had only a handful of residents, and they usually kept to themselves. Ethan placed Noah in his crib, wrapped him in a blanket, and walked to the door. The wind rattled the walls again, and for a moment he thought maybe it had been a loose panel. But then the knock came again, louder this time. He hesitated, his heart thudding. Grabbing a small wrench from his work table, he called out, "Who's there?" A woman's voice answered softly through the metal. "Please, no harm. I just need shelter." Ethan frowned. A traveler? Out here? It didn't make sense. The nearest route was miles away, and storms had been hitting the area all week. He slowly unlatched the door and opened it just a crack. Outside stood a tall woman wrapped in a dark cloak. Her hair was wet from the wind, her face pale and tired. But as she stepped closer to the light, Ethan saw something strange. The faint shimmer of scales on her cheek, and her eyes reflected the light like molten gold. He stepped back in shock. "You're Dragonkin," she finished quietly. "Yes, but I won't hurt you. I only need warmth and a place to rest. Please, it's freezing out here." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Stories of the Dragonkin had spread through the colonies for years, about how they were dangerous, how they had fought in the old wars. Many humans hated them, fearing their strength and their fire. But looking at her now, she didn't seem like the monsters from those stories. She looked like someone who hadn't eaten or slept in days. He lowered the wrench. "Come in," he said finally. She stepped inside, moving slowly, as if afraid to startle him. The air outside rushed in behind her, carrying the chill of the night. Ethan shut the door quickly and turned back toward the small heater. The woman removed her cloak, revealing more scales along her arms. Faint, silver, and glimmering like moonlight. Her clothes were worn and torn at the edges, showing signs of long travel. Ethan handed her a small towel. "You can sit by the heater," he said. "You look half frozen." She nodded gratefully and sat down near the warmth. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Only the soft crackle of the heater and Noah's sleepy whimpers broke the silence. "Thank you," she said after a while. "My name is Lyra." "Ethan," he replied simply. "And that's Noah." Lyra smiled faintly as she glanced toward the baby. "He's beautiful." Ethan gave a tired smile. "He cries more than he sleeps." "That means he's strong," she said softly. He noticed her voice had a strange warmth to it, a tone that calmed him without meaning to. She looked around the workshop, taking in the half-built machines, the scattered tools, and the old posters peeling from the walls. "You're a mechanic?" she asked. "Yeah. Been fixing things since before the war. It's all I know." Lyra nodded slowly. "Machines can be kinder than people sometimes." Ethan didn't argue. He had felt the same way for years. Noah stirred again, crying softly. Ethan picked him up and began to rock him. Lyra watched quietly, her golden eyes reflecting the soft light. Then, without warning, she began to hum, a slow, low melody that sounded ancient. Noah stopped crying almost instantly. His tiny eyes fluttered shut, and soon he was asleep again. Ethan looked at her in surprise. "How did you do that?" Lyra smiled faintly. It's an old song my mother used to sing. It helps little ones sleep. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt since his wife's death. Peace. The room felt warmer, the storm outside quieter. He sat across from her, unsure what to say. You said you needed shelter, he began. Where are you headed? Nowhere, Lyra said softly. I have no home. I take work where I can find it. Ethan studied her tired eyes and torn clothes. He saw no threat, only exhaustion and loneliness, the kind he knew too well. You can stay here tonight, he said. The storm's not safe. Lyra bowed her head. Thank you, Ethan. You're kind. He shook his head. Just decent. There's not much kindness left in this world. They sat in silence as the heater hummed softly. Outside, the wind began to die down. For the first time in many nights, Ethan didn't feel alone. There was something about this strange woman. Something dangerous, maybe, but something deeply human too. And as the storm passed, he couldn't help but wonder if her knock at midnight was more than a coincidence. Maybe it was the beginning of something he didn't yet understand. When the first light of morning slipped through the thin window, Ethan woke to the soft sound of rain tapping against the roof. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a pale, quiet dawn. For a moment, he forgot that he had let a stranger into his home. But then he saw her, Lyra, sitting near the heater, her cloak folded neatly beside her. She was still, her eyes closed, breathing softly. Even in sleep, she seemed alert, like someone who had learned never to rest too deeply. Ethan rose quietly, careful not to wake Noah. He poured a little water into a pot and set it to boil on the small stove. The smell of old metal mixed with the faint scent of morning rain that drifted through the cracks in the walls. Lyra opened her eyes at the sound of the pot rattling. Her gaze met his, calm but guarded. Good morning, Ethan said. Did you sleep at all? A little, she replied in a low voice. Your heater kept me warm. Thank you. He nodded and handed her a cup of tea once it was ready. She held it in both hands, letting the steam warm her fingers. For the first time, in the light of day, Ethan saw her clearly. The silver scales along her neck were fine and delicate, almost beautiful. Her hair was dark, but strands of silver caught the light like thin wires. She looked human, and yet not entirely. Her eyes, deep gold, watched him with quiet curiosity. Noah began to stir in his crib, letting out a small whine. Lyra glanced at him and smiled softly. He's peaceful, she said. You must be doing well. Ethan laughed quietly. If you call staying awake half the night doing well, then sure. She smiled too, but there was sadness behind it. You're lucky, she said. He has someone to care for him. Ethan looked at her closely. You said last night you had nowhere to go. You've been traveling alone. Lyra nodded. For a long time. He didn't ask more, though part of him wanted to. Instead, he changed the subject. I've got a lot of repairs to finish today. The miners bring in broken haulers, and I'm behind schedule. I can pay a bit if you help me lift parts or clean tools. Lyra looked surprised. You'd let me work with you? Even after knowing what I am? Ethan shrugged. You helped me last night. You didn't have to. Besides, I don't care what you are, as long as you don't set my workshop on fire. A small smile curved her lips. I'll try not to. She stood and followed him to the workshop area. Ethan began showing her how the machines worked, old plasma drives, rusted fuel pumps, and half-dismantled transport engines. Lyra listened carefully, her eyes sharp and curious. When he handed her a wrench, she adjusted a loose panel with surprising skill. You've done this before, he said, raising an eyebrow. I've fixed things, she said simply. Mostly ships. Ethan blinked. Ships? Like freighters. Bigger, she replied. But that was a long time ago. He didn't press. There was a story in her words, but he could tell she wasn't ready to share it yet. Still, she moved with confidence, her hands steady and sure. Together, they worked quietly through the morning. When the old fuel cell finally powered up with a soft hum, Ethan couldn't help but smile. Not bad, he said. You've got the touch. Lyra's eyes brightened. It feels good to build again. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, spilling weak light through the dusty window panes. They shared a simple lunch, bread and a bit of canned soup. It wasn't much, but Lyra ate slowly, savoring every bite as if it were the best meal she'd had in months. Ethan sat across from her, studying her carefully. There was something about her presence that made the workshop feel less empty. She didn't talk much, but her silence was gentle, not heavy like loneliness. Noah giggled on the floor, crawling toward her boots. Lyra picked him up, and to Ethan's surprise, the baby didn't cry. He stared at her with wide eyes, fascinated by the faint shimmer of her skin. Lyra smiled at Noah. "He's not afraid," she said softly. "Kids don't know what they're supposed to fear," Ethan replied. "They just see people." Lyra looked at him, and for a moment, he saw something like gratitude in her eyes. But then she lowered her gaze again, setting Noah down gently. The air grew quiet except for the soft hum of machinery. By late afternoon, the sky turned a dull red. Ethan cleaned his tools and stretched his sore arms. Lyra helped him put the parts away, moving carefully around the cluttered room. He noticed a small scar near her wrist, shaped like an old burn. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "It's old," she said quickly. "From before." Before what, he wondered. But again, he didn't ask. He simply nodded. As the evening fell, he checked the heater and fed Noah one last time. Lyra stood by the doorway, looking out at the horizon. The wind had died completely now, leaving the desert silent. Distant lights from the mining station flickered faintly. "You can stay another night if you want," Ethan said after a pause. "It's still cold out." Lyra turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You trust too easily." "Maybe," he said, "or maybe I'm just tired of being suspicious." She gave a small nod, almost like respect. "Then I'll stay, just for tonight." Ethan smiled faintly. "Fair enough." As he turned off the lights, he glanced back at her one last time. The golden shimmer in her eyes caught the glow of the heater, and for a moment, he thought he saw a flicker of flame reflected there. He wasn't sure if it was real, or just a trick of the light, but something deep inside told him his quiet life had just changed forever. The next few days passed quietly. Lyra stayed at the workshop, helping Ethan with repairs while caring for Noah whenever he needed a break. At first, Ethan wasn't sure if it was a good idea to let her stay longer than one night, but every time he thought about asking her to leave, he saw the way Noah smiled when she was near or how her hands worked with such skill and care. She fit into the small routine of their lives so naturally that it almost felt like she had always been there. Each morning, Ethan woke to the soft sound of tools clinking or the low hum of engines warming. Lyra was always up before him, already working. She moved with quiet focus, her eyes sharp, her fingers sure. When she leaned over the engines, the light caught her silver scales, making them shimmer faintly like molten metal. Ethan often caught himself staring, though he didn't mean to. There was something about her presence that made the air feel warmer. One afternoon, they worked side by side repairing a damaged mining drone. The machine had been dropped from a cliff and was missing half its panels. Ethan sighed as he looked at it. "This one's beyond saving." Lyra tilted her head, examining the cracked metal. "Not yet," she said softly. "You just need more heat." Before he could ask what she meant, she placed her hand on the broken panel. A faint glow spread from her palm, and the metal began to soften and bend, fusing back together. Ethan stepped back in disbelief as she carefully reshaped the metal until it sealed perfectly. When the glow faded, she looked up at him. "Now it's ready." Ethan's eyes widened. "You can melt steel with your hands?" Lyra lowered her gaze, almost embarrassed. "It's a gift of my kind. We can shape metal and fire. It's useful when people aren't afraid of it." He nodded slowly, still amazed. "That's incredible. You just saved me hours of work." Lyra smiled faintly. "Maybe I earned another meal then?" He laughed. "You've earned a whole week's worth." Later, as the sun dipped low, they sat near the heater sharing dinner. Simple soup and bread again, but neither complained. Noah lay nearby, playing with an old wrench that Ethan had cleaned for him. Lyra watched him, her expression soft and thoughtful. "You're good with him," Ethan said quietly. "I've always liked children," she replied. "They see the world without hate. I wish adults did the same." Ethan stirred his soup. "It's hard to forget war." Lyra's voice dropped. "I know." She stared at the floor, her golden eyes dim. "I was part of it once. Not as a soldier, but as an engineer. I built machines that brought destruction instead of life. I thought I was helping my people survive. But when I saw what those machines did—" She paused. "I couldn't build anymore. I left. I've been running ever since." Ethan listened quietly. He didn't interrupt. Her voice trembled slightly, but there was strength beneath it, too. When she looked up again, he saw the guilt that lived behind her eyes. "I'm not afraid of you," he said finally. She blinked in surprise. "You should be. My kind destroyed cities. And my kind built the bombs," Ethan replied. "We both did terrible things. Maybe fixing things now makes up for a little of it." Lyra looked at him, then smiled slowly. "You sound like someone who still believes people can change." "Maybe I have to," Ethan said. "For Noah's sake." A silence settled between them, comfortable and warm. Outside, the wind picked up again, whistling softly through the cracks. The light from the heater flickered across their faces. Noah let out a happy squeal, waving the wrench in the air, and both of them laughed. As night deepened, Ethan set Noah in his crib and leaned against the wall, exhausted but content. Lyra stood by the door, looking out at the stars through the dusty window. "It's strange," she said softly. "I used to think the stars were cold, but from here, they almost look warm." Ethan joined her at the window. "Maybe it's not the stars," he said. "Maybe it's the company." She turned to him, her golden eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "You're kind, Ethan. That's dangerous in a world like this." He smiled tiredly. "Maybe, but it's the only way I know how to be." Lyra looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, "You remind me what it feels like to belong." Ethan didn't know what to say. The air between them felt charged, like the quiet before a storm. But before he could speak, Noah stirred again, and the spell broke. Lyra turned away, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Good night, Ethan," she said softly. "Good night, Lyra." As she walked toward her small cot near the heater, Ethan watched her for a moment longer. Something deep inside told him that her arrival hadn't been chance. He didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in years, the workshop felt alive again, filled not just with the hum of machines, but with something far rarer: hope. Several days passed peacefully after that night. The workshop had never felt so alive. Lyra and Ethan worked side by side, fixing machines, tuning engines, and keeping the small power generators of the colony running. Noah had grown used to Lyra's voice and would smile whenever she came close. The quiet rhythm of their days felt almost normal, almost safe. But safety never lasted long on the edge of the frontier. It was late afternoon when the first sign of trouble appeared. A distant hum broke the silence, deep and mechanical, growing louder with each passing second. Ethan stepped outside, shielding his eyes from the sun, and saw two armored vehicles approaching from the main road. Dust rose behind them in thick clouds. He recognized the insignia on their sides, the emblem of the Colonial Security Force. His stomach tightened. "Enforcers," he muttered. Lyra heard the word and froze. The color drained from her face. She set down the wrench she was holding and moved closer to Noah's crib. "Are they coming here?" she asked quietly. "Looks like it," Ethan said. "Maybe they're just passing through." But even as he said it, he knew that wasn't true. The colony was too small, too remote for casual visits. Moments later, the vehicles stopped in front of his workshop. Four soldiers stepped out, their armor reflecting the fading sunlight. The leader, a tall man with a scar along his jaw, approached the door with a scanner in hand. "Evening," Ethan said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Evening," the officer replied. "Name's Captain Harris. We're conducting a routine inspection." There have been reports of Dragonkin fugitives moving through this sector. You seen anything unusual? Ethan felt his pulse quicken. He glanced toward the back room where Lyra was hiding. No, nothing like that, he said. Just me and my kid trying to make a living. The captain's eyes narrowed slightly. Mind if we take a look around? Ethan hesitated. You got a warrant? The man smiled thinly. Out here, we don't need one. He motioned to his team. Search the area. The soldiers began moving through the workshop, opening crates, scanning machines, and peering into every corner. Ethan followed them, trying to stay calm. Noah started to cry, sensing the tension. One of the soldiers gave the baby a curious look before turning away. In the back room, Lyra crouched behind a pile of scrap metal, her heart pounding. She could hear the footsteps getting closer, the low buzz of the scanners sweeping through the walls. Her hands trembled slightly, and she pressed them together to keep from making noise. If they found her, she knew what would happen. The bounty for a Dragonkin exile was enough to make any man betray even a friend. Ethan tried to distract the soldiers, pointing out broken machines and useless parts. I haven't seen anyone come by in weeks, he said. You can check my records if you want. But the captain wasn't convinced. He looked around the dusty shop and then stepped closer to Ethan. You've got a lot of metal here, he said. A good hiding place for someone who doesn't want to be found. Ethan met his eyes. What are you implying? The captain smiled coldly. Just doing my job. He turned to one of his men. Check the back. The soldier nodded and moved toward the door leading to Lyra's hiding place. Ethan's throat went dry. Wait, he said quickly. There's nothing back there but old junk. I haven't cleaned that room in months. The captain ignored him. Search it. The door opened with a creak, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. Lyra pressed herself deeper into the shadows, barely breathing. The soldier stepped inside, shining a light across the cluttered space. It passed over her hiding spot, hesitated for a heartbeat, and then moved on. Clear, the soldier said. Ethan exhaled slowly, though his hands were still shaking. The captain gave the room one last glance, then turned back toward him. If you see anything, or anyone, unusual, you report it. Understood. Understood, Ethan said quietly. The soldiers climbed back into their vehicles, engines roaring to life. Within moments, they were gone, leaving only dust and silence behind. Ethan stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the road until the vehicles disappeared into the distance. When he finally turned back, Lyra stepped out from the shadows. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. They were looking for me, she whispered. I figured, Ethan said. You didn't tell me there was a bounty on you. There's a bounty on all of us, she said. Anyone who survived the war. They call us dangerous, even though most of us just want peace. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. You should have told me. I didn't want to put you or Noah in danger, Lyra said. But I understand if you want me to leave now. He looked at her for a long moment. She stood there, trembling slightly, her eyes filled with shame. Noah whimpered softly, and Lyra glanced toward him with guilt written across her face. Ethan sighed. You can't leave. Not now. They'll still be searching the area. You'll be caught before you reach the hills. Lyra's eyes met his. Then what should I do? He hesitated, then said, You hide, until I can figure something out. Lyra nodded slowly. You're risking a lot for me. Maybe, Ethan said, but I owe you. You saved my workshop and you've been good to my son. I'm not turning my back on you now. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Lyra whispered, Thank you. Ethan nodded and looked toward the door. The sky was turning red again, the color of fading sunlight mixed with dust. Trouble had found them, and deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The night after the soldiers left was long and heavy. Ethan barely slept. He kept the lights dim and the doors locked, listening for the sound of engines or boots outside. But the only sound was the soft hum of the heater and Noah's quiet breathing. Lyra sat by the window, staring out into the desert darkness. The faint glow of her eyes reflected the light from the stars. When morning came, she was still there. Ethan found her awake, motionless, as if she hadn't moved all night. "You didn't sleep," he said softly. "I couldn't," she replied. "Every time I close my eyes, I see their faces. The soldiers. The ones who hunted us before." Ethan poured 2 cups of coffee. "You don't have to talk about it," he said. "But maybe it'd help if I understood what you're running from." Lyra took the cup, holding it between her hands for warmth. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then she said quietly, "I was an engineer in the Draconian fleets. During the war, I helped design their fusion cores, the engines that powered their ships. I thought I was helping my people survive. But the generals changed the designs. They turned them into weapons. Weapons that burned whole cities." Ethan watched her, saying nothing. Lyra looked down. "When I realized what they were doing, I tried to stop them. I sabotaged one of the shipyards, destroyed the plans before they could build more. They called me a traitor. Humans saw me as a monster. My own people saw me as a betrayer. So I ran." Her voice trembled slightly, though her face stayed calm. "Everywhere I go, someone remembers the war. Some want revenge. Some want the bounty. I thought maybe here, in this forgotten place, I could disappear." Ethan sat down across from her. "You wanted to start over." Lyra nodded. "To build instead of destroy." He leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow breath. "You're not the only one with a past. I used to build weapons too, small ones, ground rifles. The factory I worked in was destroyed during the war. I lost my wife that same day." Lyra looked at him quietly. "That's why you live out here." He nodded. "People in the city couldn't look at me without seeing a reminder of what they'd lost. So I left, started fixing machines instead of breaking them." For a moment, they sat in silence, 2 people from opposite sides of a war, bound by the same guilt. The only sound was the soft hiss of the heater. Lyra finally spoke again. "You know, in my culture, fire isn't just for destruction. It's for creation too. The forge, the place where metal meets flame, is sacred to us. It's where new life is made from broken things." Ethan smiled faintly. "Guess that makes this workshop your forge, then." She returned his smile. "Maybe it's ours." The day passed quietly. They worked together on repairs, keeping busy to drown out their thoughts. Lyra seemed lighter after sharing her story. She even laughed once, a sound Ethan hadn't heard before. Low, musical, almost like a whisper of wind through flame. It made the small space feel warmer. But as the sun began to set, Ethan noticed something strange. The workshop's power grid flickered again, even though it had been stable for days. He checked the control board and found an unfamiliar signal, an encrypted transmission pulsing through the local channel. "Lyra," he called, "come look at this." She walked over and studied the screen. Her face darkened. "It's a scan frequency. The enforcers are sweeping the sector again. They must think they missed something." Ethan cursed under his breath. "How far away?" "Maybe 2 or 3 miles, she said. "They're moving slow, scanning every settlement." He looked around the workshop. "If they find you here," Lyra's voice was calm but firm, "then I'll leave before they arrive. I won't bring danger to you or your son." Ethan shook his head. "You won't make it far. Not in daylight. They'll track your heat signature." She looked at him steadily. "Then I'll do what I was trained to do. Hide the signal." Before he could ask what she meant, Lyra walked to the main generator. She placed both hands on its metal casing. A faint glow began to spread under her palms, pulsing in rhythm with her breath. Ethan stepped back as the power lights flickered, then steadied again. The humming grew louder for a moment before settling into a deep, steady rhythm. "What did you do?" Ethan asked. "I cloaked the signal," Lyra said softly. "To any scanners, this workshop will look like dead metal. No energy, no heat. But it won't last long." Ethan stared at her, amazed. "You just saved us again." Lyra smiled faintly, though her eyes were tired. "Not saved, just bought us time." He nodded. "Then we'll use it. We'll figure out how to keep you safe for good." Lyra looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You keep saying we. You don't have to." "Yes, I do," Ethan said. "You're part of this now, whether you like it or not." Her golden eyes softened. "Then I hope your forge is strong enough to hold us both." Outside, the night fell over the colony again. The stars glimmered faintly in the dark sky, and the workshop lights dimmed to a warm glow. Inside, for the first time in years, both of them felt something that almost resembled peace. Fragile, flickering, but real. The next morning came quietly. The colony was still, covered in a thin layer of dust from the night winds. Ethan stood outside the workshop watching the horizon. The desert stretched endlessly before him, silent and golden under the rising sun. He tried to shake off the unease sitting heavy in his chest, but it lingered like smoke. Lyra joined him a few minutes later, her long coat brushing against the sand. Her eyes scanned the same horizon, sharp and distant. "They're still out there," she said softly. Ethan nodded. "You can feel them?" "I can hear the hum of their engines through the sand," she replied. "My kind are sensitive to energy fields. It's faint, but getting closer." Ethan frowned. "Then we need a plan. We can't keep hiding forever." Lyra turned toward him. "Do you trust me?" He hesitated only a moment before saying, "Yes." "Then there's something you need to see." Inside the workshop, Lyra knelt near the generator she had cloaked the night before. She pulled open a hidden compartment beneath it, revealing a small, smooth device that shimmered faintly in the light. It looked like a crystal fused with metal, pulsing with soft blue energy. Ethan crouched beside her. "What is that?" "It's a forge core," Lyra said. "A fragment of the same energy we used to power our ships. I salvaged it before I fled. It's dangerous if mishandled, but powerful if used right." Ethan stared at it. "You've had this the whole time?" "I didn't trust anyone enough to tell them," she said. "Until now." He could hear the weight in her voice, the risk she was taking by showing him. "What can it do?" "It can mask our energy signatures permanently," Lyra said. "It can even bend heat readings, confuse scanners. But it needs to be rebuilt and anchored into your workshop system. That's what the forge is for." Ethan rubbed his chin. "You think we can rebuild it?" Lyra smiled faintly. "We can try. You're a better mechanic than you think." They worked all morning, dismantling cables and rerouting power conduits. Lyra handled the forge core with careful precision, guiding Ethan through each adjustment. The air grew warm with the scent of metal and ozone. Noah slept in his crib, the faint hum of the machines lulling him into peaceful dreams. At midday, Lyra paused to rest. Sweat glistened on her forehead, and her scales, faint silvery lines beneath her skin, caught the light. Ethan handed her a water bottle and smiled. "You make this look easy." She laughed softly. "That's because you haven't seen me fail yet." "Let's hope today's not the first time," he said. Hours passed, and by late afternoon, the forge core began to pulse more strongly. Lyra connected the last wire, and the lights in the workshop flickered, then steadied. A faint blue glow spread across the walls like rippling water. "It's working," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They won't be able to find us now." Ethan let out a long breath. "That's a relief." But before either of them could relax, a sharp, distant explosion shook the air. Dust fell from the rafters and Noah began to cry. Ethan rushed to the door and looked outside. In the distance, a column of smoke rose from the western ridge. "That's close," he said. Lyra's face went pale. "They've found someone." "Another settlement?" She nodded. "The enforcers are clearing every town along the route. They're searching for me. That explosion means they're using drones." Ethan clenched his fists. "If they sweep this way again." "They will," Lyra said quietly. "And next time, they'll come straight here." Ethan turned toward her, his jaw tight. "Then we have to move." Lyra hesitated. "You can't run with a baby. The desert is too harsh, and the next colony is days away. You wouldn't survive the storms. So we stay." She looked at him with steady eyes. "No, we fight." Ethan stared at her. "Fight them? With what?" I've got tools and an old pulse rifle that barely fires. Lyra reached for the forge core and placed it gently into a small containment shell. With this, she said. And with me. Her tone was calm but fierce, the quiet strength of someone who had faced death before and walked away from it. Ethan saw it then, the faint shimmer of scales on her neck, the flicker of heat that seemed to rise from her skin. The dragon within her wasn't gone. It was just waiting. Lyra, he said slowly. What are you planning? She met his gaze. I'm done running. If the past wants to burn me, I'll burn brighter. Ethan swallowed hard, feeling both fear and admiration. Then we stand together. Lyra's lips curved in a small smile. Together, then. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of red and gold. The forge glowed softly behind them, humming with power. The air was still for now, but both of them knew what was coming. The flames of the past were rising again. The night before the battle was silent, almost unnaturally so. The desert air felt heavy, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Ethan worked through the night, preparing everything he could, reinforcing the doors, charging the old rifle, and setting up the defense drones he had salvaged from the scrapyard years ago. They weren't built for war, but they could at least buy them time. Lyra stood at the forge, her hands hovering over the glowing core. The blue light shimmered across her face, casting faint patterns of scales along her skin. She was calm, but her eyes carried a deep, focused fire. They'll come at sunrise, she said quietly. Ethan didn't look up from his work. How can you be sure? It's what the enforcers do, she replied. They strike when the light's behind them. It blinds their targets and gives them an advantage. Ethan gave a dry chuckle. Guess they didn't plan on facing a dragon. Lyra smiled faintly. A half-dragon. My wings were taken when I fled the fleet. He paused, looking at her. Taken? She nodded slowly. They called it mercy, said no exile should fly again. But I still carry the fire. He wanted to say something comforting, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he loaded the rifle and checked its power cell. Then we used that fire wisely. The hours crawled by. Ethan finally sat down beside Noah's crib, watching his son sleep. The boy's small hands twitched in his dreams. He looked peaceful, untouched by the danger outside. Lyra walked over and knelt beside them. You should rest, Ethan. He shook his head. Can't. Not tonight. She looked at him for a moment, then gently placed her hand on his shoulder. Whatever happens tomorrow, know this. You've already done more for me than anyone ever has. He met her gaze. You don't owe me thanks. Maybe not, she said softly. But you deserve it. They sat in silence for a while, the forge's low hum filling the room. When the first light of dawn began to creep through the window, Lyra stood. They're here, she said. Ethan rose and looked outside. Dust clouds moved along the ridge, the unmistakable sign of armored vehicles approaching. He counted 3 transports and at least a dozen soldiers. Stay inside, Lyra said, her voice calm. If they breach the doors, protect Noah. Don't come out unless I call you. Lyra! She turned to him with a steady gaze. Trust me. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Be careful. Lyra stepped outside. The wind whipped her coat around her legs as she faced the horizon. The enforcers' vehicles rolled closer, stopping just beyond the edge of the workshop yard. Captain Harris emerged first, his armor gleaming in the morning light. Dragonkin, he called out, his voice echoing across the sand. You're harboring stolen technology and violating peace orders. Surrender now, and your death will be swift. Lyra's eyes narrowed. I've surrendered enough in my life. The captain raised his hand. Open fire. The first volley came fast, pulses of blue light streaking through the air. Lyra raised her arms, and a shield of shimmering heat rippled into existence. The shots scattered harmlessly across it, lighting the air with sparks. The ground beneath her feet began to glow faintly, veins of molten energy spreading outward. Inside, Ethan watched through a narrow crack in the door. His heart pounded as he saw Lyra step forward, fire beginning to coil around her hands. The forge core inside the workshop pulsed in sync with her movements, reacting to her power. She thrust her arms forward, and a wave of flame erupted across the sand. The nearest transport was hit head-on, its metal frame melting in seconds. The soldiers scrambled for cover, shouting orders, their armor glowing from the heat. Ethan grabbed his rifle and took a position by the window. He aimed at one of the drones hovering above the field and fired. The shot struck true, sending the drone spiraling into the dirt. Lyra fought like a storm unleashed. The air shimmered with heat as bursts of energy met walls of fire. She moved with grace and fury, every motion precise. But even as she struck down one attacker after another, more poured from the transports. A missile streaked toward her. She turned too late. The explosion threw her backward, sending her crashing into the sand. Her shield flickered and faded. "Lyra!" Ethan shouted, bursting through the door. She groaned, pushing herself up, smoke curling from her burned sleeve. The captain advanced, rifle raised. "It's over," he said. "The bounty ends here." Ethan fired again, hitting the captain's arm. The shot glanced off the armor but made him stumble. Lyra took the chance. She drew on the forge's power one last time. The glow beneath the sand flared bright red as she slammed her hands to the ground. A surge of fire erupted outward, engulfing the battlefield. The enforcers' vehicles went up in flames, their engines bursting. The captain fell, his armor melting away in the inferno. When the fire faded, the desert was silent again. The air shimmered with heat, and the smell of smoke hung thick. Ethan ran to Lyra's side. She was kneeling, exhausted, her hands shaking. "It's over," he said softly. She looked up at him, her eyes glowing faintly gold. "For now." He helped her to her feet and glanced at the burning wrecks in the distance. "They'll send more, won't they?" Lyra nodded weakly. "They always do." Ethan tightened his grip on her arm. "Then we'll be ready next time." She gave him a tired smile. "You really believe that?" He looked toward the forge, still pulsing with blue light. "Yeah, I do." The first full rays of dawn broke over the horizon, washing the desert in gold. The flames had died, but their warmth lingered. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt something like hope rising with the sun. The day after the battle was eerily quiet. Smoke still rose from the blackened wrecks scattered across the sand, twisting upward into the pale morning sky. The desert wind had softened, carrying away the last traces of ash and metal. Ethan stood at the edge of the yard, looking at what was left. It felt unreal, like the world had broken and then stitched itself together overnight. Behind him, Lyra was resting inside the workshop. Her burns had begun to heal, faint golden light pulsing beneath her skin as her body mended itself. She had pushed herself to the edge to protect them. Ethan couldn't forget the sight of her surrounded by flames, terrifying and beautiful all at once. He turned as Noah's soft cry broke the silence. The child was awake again, reaching up toward the ceiling with a small hand. Ethan smiled wearily and lifted him. "Hey, little man," he said. "We made it through." Lyra stirred from her cot, her voice hoarse but calm. "You should rest, too." Ethan looked at her. "I'll rest when I know they're not coming back." Lyra sat up slowly, wincing a little. "They won't for a while. The signal jammers we set up with the forge core scrambled their comms. It'll take them days to regroup." He nodded, though the thought gave little comfort. "And after that?" "After that," she said, "we keep moving forward." Ethan sighed and sat beside her. The forge behind them hummed softly, its light steady and warm. "You know, when you first knocked on that door, I thought my life was already over. Just me and Noah, waiting for the world to forget about us." Lyra smiled faintly. "And now?" He looked at her. "Now, I'm not sure what's coming, but it feels like living again." For a moment, there was only silence between them. Outside, the sun rose higher, casting long golden rays through the dusty windows. Lyra stood, her movements slower than before but full of quiet strength. She walked to the forge and placed her hand on its metal surface. "This place," she said softly, "it's more than a workshop now. It's a sanctuary. You built it with your hands, and now it's alive with something greater." Ethan joined her, watching the gentle glow spread under her touch. "What will you do now?" She hesitated, then said, "The enforcers will keep coming. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but they won't stop. I can't stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, I'll have to face them again." He frowned. "Then you're leaving?" Lyra turned to him, her eyes soft. "Not yet. I owe you and Noah more than I can ever repay. And besides," she smiled, "I still haven't fixed your pulse generator." Ethan laughed, the sound rough but genuine. "Guess that means you're staying a little longer." They worked together through the day, repairing what they could. The workshop slowly came back to life, its hum returning to the steady rhythm that had once filled their quiet days. Lyra moved with renewed purpose, her hands sure, her focus sharp. The light in her eyes had changed, no longer haunted, but determined. That evening, they sat outside the workshop, watching the last light fade over the horizon. The desert glowed in hues of gold and red, and the air was calm again. Noah sat between them, giggling at the way the wind tugged at his small blanket. "You know," Ethan said quietly, "I used to think this world didn't have much left worth saving." Lyra looked at him. "And now," he smiled faintly, "now I think it's worth fighting for." She nodded. "Then you've learned what my people call the heart of the forge. Creation through struggle, strength through flame." Ethan watched her as the last rays of sunlight caught the faint shimmer of scales at her neck. "You're part of that forge too," he said. "You burned away everything that tried to destroy you, and what's left is something new." Lyra met his gaze, her expression soft but unreadable. "Maybe that's what humans and dragons share," she said. "We both rise from what was broken." As darkness settled, the first stars began to appear overhead. The world was still scarred, but it felt alive again. The forge's faint glow spilled out through the workshop's open door, lighting the sand around them. Ethan held Noah close and looked toward the horizon. "Whatever comes next," he said, "we'll face it together." Lyra smiled, her golden eyes reflecting the stars. Together. And as the night deepened, the desert fell quiet once more. The winds whispered through the dunes, carrying with them the promise of a new beginning. A new dawn forged in fire, hope, and the unspoken bond between a lonely mechanic, his child, and the dragon woman who knocked at midnight.